Hey folks, my name is Bill, and I'm here to provide you a gentle introduction to DSPy. And this is particularly for Grug Brain developers. There's a lot of smart people out there in the world. Obviously, the creators of DSPy, I know some of them, and they're pretty smart. And so I wanted to provide a very, very simple introduction so people can actually get started with the library because I'm a huge believer in it. Obviously, I'm not paid for this. This is just kind of something that, I find fun. So let's get right into it. This post, by the way, we're going to be working through a Jupyter notebook, but it's going to be posted on my website, Learn by Building AI. Hey, I believe the best way to learn is to build, and that's what I'm working on doing. And so you can check it out in the tutorials here. But let's go ahead and get started. So first things first. This tutorial is really intended to be a very gentle introduction. And what we're going to do is we're going to walk through some of the key concepts and requirements that I've found when I've been using DSPy to be really effective. And the goal here is that you can turn around and think about how you could apply this to your problem. And so for that reason, I'm not going to use any sort of like obtuse or obscure data sets. We're going to watch it happen right here. We're going to make it super simple, and we're going to make it really easy to learn. So let's go ahead and do that. So let me go ahead and get running. You can ignore this import here. This is just for my loading the environment variables. So what are we going to do in this tutorial, right? Hey, so this is for Grug Brain developers, right? What do I mean by that? Well, hopefully you've read this article, grugbrain.dev. I think it's a hilarious article. I relate to it a lot because it really pushes for simplicity. And hey, there are times when you need to take on a little complexity to actually deliver overall simplicity. But this post is actually written in this kind of fun and playful way, right? Hey, we don't get great sentences, we don't get great sentence structure, but the author here, and I'm not the author to be very clear, really, makes for a fun learning experience. And so what we want to do is we want to be able to generate text just like Grug would be able to do. And so that's really going to be the goal of this tutorial. We're going to walk step by step how we're going to actually approach that. So first things first is we are going to grab our source material. So we're going to download this website and we're going to go ahead and get the text from it here. Okay. And our goal, if you remember, is going to be able to create text in this kind of format here. Right? And of course, we could do all kinds of complex things. We could fine tune, we could train a base model, we could train an adapter, whatever. But what we want to try and do is actually just do the simplest thing here. And hey, is that we can provide a prompt that will give us something like that. So let's go ahead and do that. So first things first, we are going to just do a simple call to actually translate the Grug text into text that we can understand, into plain English. And we're just going to use OpenAI to be able to do that. And so we have a little prompt here, a little prompt structure, nothing crazy, but really the goal here is just to be able to translate Grug. So let's go ahead and do that. And when we do that, we're going to get our output, obviously. So this is what's going to allow us to build a data set. And a data set is a really key part of DSPy. And I think because there's been so much focus on prompts and that sort of thing in the AI world, people don't really get that. So let's just make it very, very simple. We're going to have basically 10 rows here of data, and it's going to map from plain English into Grug text, and obviously back and forth. Right? And we're leveraging OpenAI to do this translation, but we could also be the ones writing this out, right? We're generating with synthetic data, but we could also be translating this. This could come from users, any number of different feedback mechanisms, okay? And so far, we haven't done anything with DSPy, but now when we're actually building our data set, we're going to need to use really a concept in DSPy, which is basically an example or a row, right? Nothing really complicated there. So let's go ahead and look at these rows. Here we have me building one of those, and there's a couple of key parts here. So the first part is that there is an example, right? And that's just going to contain exactly what we were just talking about, where we have the Grug text and the plain English, okay? And the inputs are plain English. And that's important for one particular reason. If you remember, we're trying to generate Grug text. So we're actually going to use the output from our translate Grug function as the input to our new the new model that we're going to be working with. And we're going to use this Grug text from the website as the source of truth, right? Because that's what Grug would say. So we're building that data set. And our input is the plain English version. Okay? So right now, we're going to split that into a training and, really like a test set here. Okay? So we're going to end up with 6 training examples, and you can see exactly what they are, right? And we performed a shuffle here. I guess that's not really relevant in this particular case, but yeah, I guess that's how I've done it so far. So now what we're going to do is we're going to grab DSPy's version of OpenAI. And, LangChain, LlamaIndex, all these tools end up wrapping OpenAI. DSPy does it this way. I think there's a little bit of nuance to this. I don't want to dive into it right now, but I guess the important thing here is that DSPy references the model via context. And it kind of looks around with, hey, what context am I in for it to choose the model? And yeah, that'll kind of come up a bit momentarily when we're actually doing our assessment. So we've talked about examples. That's a very sort of easy DSPy concept. Let's actually talk about signatures. And by signatures, I actually mean prompts. And these signatures, I would say, I found it on the Discord and I can't quite remember, I can't quite find the link, but they're not really optimized for chat models per se. And we'll kind of talk about why that's the case a little bit later on. But for all intents and purposes, it's really just a mapping, right? And the key concept behind signatures is that they're just prompts and they provide different ways of providing instructions to the actual model, okay? So here we have our Grug translation, right? And if you remember, we're going to output Grug text and we're going to input plain English. So let's go ahead and do that. So this object, right, or rather, yeah, this object that we have is going to have a signature. And you can see here, I'm sure you've seen this if you looked at the DSPy docs, it's all over. And this is really like the shorthand version, right? The top and the bottom are fundamentally equivalent. The key difference here is that we've provided some more instructions to the model that end up right here. And I've found this method helpful in kind of telling me, hey, what's actually everything that's going into this model? And if you remember, signatures are just prompts, so it's actually translated into a prompt template prior to it being passed to the model. And I was reading a bunch through the code, and this is exactly how it does that. So we're going to end up with a template here that provides our instruction that we had above. It provides the plain English version and then the Grug text. And it will repeat that here, right? So basically, here's an example, and this is exactly what it will kind of render for this second half of it, with the instruction being at the top. Now, one thing that caught me immediately, and that I'm just going to use as an example here, is there's a couple of different concepts here, but a key one is formatting. And I updated the docs so that it actually includes this, but passing in this format, passing in a function into the format allows you to control exactly how it's displayed. And what we have to do here is this will actually allow us to display multi-line strings well. It doesn't actually, by default, DSPy does not display multi-line strings correctly to start. But you can see here that our format has added these equal signs, and we changed the prefix here to the Grug text. And we don't need to do that in this case. I just wanted to show that as an example. So let's go ahead and go back, and now we can see our template for plain English and Grug text. So first things first, right? We want to be outputting Grug text. So we're going to try the simplest version, which is zero-shot prompting. So we're going to inherit from this class DSPy module, and we're going to perform a chain of thought. And the key principle behind this is that DSPy can look at much longer sequences, not just say one call, but it could perform some retrieval and then input that into the prompt. But the key concept here is that tools like chain of thought or chain of destiny, these sort of prompt structures are like first-class primitives in DSPy. And the benefit there is that it's very standardized. And that's actually critical if you ever want to be able to use a different model or compare the output, right? We've all seen how Anthropic loves to use XML, right? They love, or rather these Claude models love XML. GPT series doesn't seem to, Claude series does. And so how do we make sure that that's really abstract and we could basically keep that as sugar on top of the fundamental prompt, right? That is kind of in the way that I think about it, how DSPy approaches prompts. So we built this little program that is going to have a forward, and it's going to call our chain of thought on this signature, right? On sort of like the fundamental primitive or primitive prompt, which is a signature. So let's go ahead and run it. So we're going to instantiate it, and we are going to run, oops, I probably forgot to run our actual model here. So that's loaded. Great. Here we are. So you'll see that we got rationale. That wasn't something we had to specify. That is a part of this program, the chain of thought one, right? And the output text is Grug, no make, big thing, when you should not construct complex systems. That's reasonable. It's clear the model has some notion of Grug Brain. But hey, we want to make it better, right? We want to have really good output here, right? So as I said, there's a whole sequence of things that we can do, right? And the next step that we're going to take on in this tutorial is to tune the prompt and examples. So let's provide some better examples. So we have the better examples. What we want to do is we want to define better, which means how do we know a Grug text output is any good? And we need to go from vibes where, hey, we kind of like get it here, right? And we can pass in this whole text into the prompt and say, hey, write it in this style and that kind of thing, right? But alternatively, what we could do is we could define metrics that we actually want to use to evaluate our output. And so that's exactly what we're going to do. So here I have defined a metric, which is the automated readability index. So this is actually just a standard measurement. It's pretty old. I'd love to see the PDF readers try on this April 4th of 1968 paper. But basically it has a heuristic here for measuring readability index. And, Grug doesn't use a lot of punctuation. That's kind of a key part of how it's doing sort of sentence tokenization, sentence splitting. And so I added a new line character, which isn't actually in the formula, but work with me here. I'm working with what I got. So we can see here that our examples that Grug, by this definition, is actually writing in a more complex way, right? And the source sort of plain English text has pretty high variance, while the Grug text ends up being a little bit complicated. It's kind of all over the place, right? So, I'd have to look at all of the data to see, or a way of approaching this would be to look at all of the data and see what's the actual good metric here. But what we're going to say is, hey, Grug has to write below, 7.01, where lower is, I get better, or more simple, or more readable here. And now we're actually going to define a metric. And metrics in DSPy have a certain structure. There's every metric is going to be passed in these particular values. It's going to be passed in a truth value, which is a prediction object that we'll get to in a minute, an actual prediction, so they have the same structure, and then a way of actually like calculating a comparison here, right? So let's go ahead and create that metric. Now we want to have a second metric, right? Because this one is going to be too narrow. That's just a measurement. It's just a numerical number calculating the readability. But there's a lot of ways of having very readable material that isn't Grug-brained, right? So there's a particular style that Grug uses. And for that, we're going to use GPT-4 as sort of a judge here. And we are going to assess based on this question. So this is something that's in the docs. I found it to be like a little confusing. It took me a little bit to kind of understand, but let's go ahead and walk through it. Basically, this is it's again a prompt, right? Where we're going to say, hey, given this assessed text and this question that we provide, give us an answer that is yes or no, okay? And right here, it's assessed text, right? And so that means we should modify this prompt a bit. It says, given the assessed text, basically this variable, given the assessed text, provide a yes or no to the assessment question. So we'll see why that's kind of relevant here as we're kind of editing it on the fly, is we're going to have the assessed text, we're going to have the assessment question, and then the actual answer, okay? And we just passed in an example here, and it's just going to render exactly that. So these are little things that I've used to help like kind of debug exactly what is going on. But these labels are important because we are going to use those to actually perform our Grug text assessment. So this is sort of a rough notion of similarity, and I'm going to say, hey, does the assessed text, right, what we have here, have the same meaning as the gold standard text provided below? So we have gold standard text. I'll go ahead and wrap this in quotes, just to be very clear. I'll say provide only a yes or no question. So this comes back to the model context. So we're going to say, hey, using GPT-4 within this block, run this prediction based on this question where my assessed text and my assessed question is here. We're going to print out the result here just so we can actually kind of follow along very simply, and then we'll actually get our example and go here. To be blunt, I'm not sure. This is how it is. This is how sort of Booleans more or less are handled within the docs. I believe the similarity metric, as well as this other one, could actually just be values. I've chosen to stay consistent, start very simple, and just go with true, false, basically, and return those values. So here we have our similarity metric. Now we're going to have our overall metric. We're going to combine these two. So, hey, if it's similar and it's readable, remember we set some threshold here. I believe it was 7.01. Then return true, otherwise it's false. Now we get into the teleprompt here. So the teleprompt, I believe they're called optimizers now, is really just, hey, what's the methodology that we're going to use to improve our prompt, okay, or to optimize our prompt? And the way in which we're going to do that is it's bootstrap few shot. And if my understanding is correct, basically we're going to use the examples that we have. We are going to generate some synthetic examples, and we're going to see if we can like improve things that way for what we're passing into Grug here. I like to set max errors equal to 1. If you've run this on larger data sets and it throws an error, sometimes it takes a little bit, and I would rather just have it not continue immediately. So that's another little thing that helped me. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use bootstrap viewshot that we defined based on this overall metric, and we are going to compile our chain of thought to use some examples that are viewshot prompt examples to actually try and improve. Okay, so that's actually going to run the training, and we're going to see some print statements as that's happening. So You can see here we got some assessment answers, that there was some readability in sort of the gold standard to what actually Grug was outputting. And basically it seems to have bootstraps 4 based on 6 examples. So let's go ahead and actually run our evaluation here. So from here, we're going to import evaluate. We're going to look at each of the individual metrics, and then we'll go ahead and run it right there. So what this will do is this will run this assessment. It's going to give us a table for each individual metric so we can kind of understand where things are going well and where things are not. What this allows us to do is understand what's happening in the model. This is really akin to evals, but maybe a more structured and actually like optimization-driven approach here. So here we have our example text. Big brain developers are many, and some not expected to like this make sour face. It's going to be true for this post as well. Many smart developers, some not happy, make face not pleased. Similarity metric, hey, it's not actually perfect. I wouldn't say this is super similar. So, hey, now we actually have to maybe tweak our assessment, our evaluation model there, or prompt, right? Right, so here is Grug Brain developer, not so smart, but Grug Brain developer, program many long year and learn some things, although mostly still confused. I think this output text is actually pretty good, right? Grug, think big brain once, but then learn hard way, not big brain. This one hurts me a lot because I think I've had I've learned that over the years. But basically, we can see here that overall it did okay. And I guess it didn't display this last row. There are 6, but I believe that that one's false if I'm looking at this average metric output here. For the ARI metric, it looks like overall Grug has done a good job. One of them missed, wasn't actually good. So our Grug readability is kind of doing a good job, at least given that, right? And here we've actually gone through, and now we've actually built out, we've tuned some examples that we pass into the prompt, or that DSPy passes into the prompt on our behalf, and we use those examples to actually make predictions in the future, right? So the way in which we would do that is optimized COT forward. And you should not I believe that's our same like little test prompt here. I'll go ahead and scroll back up to find it. You should not construct complex systems. Grug text, no build complex systems. So I'd have to think about it more. I'd have to kind of work through it, but I would say that this is a better example than our few shot example, right? And we've gotten that by actually because the model now uses the examples that we tuned from that few shot from those few shot examples, right? And so we can continue to use this model. We can save it. We can actually change the way in which we get examples. We can use more of the data. That's really a lot of the power here, that basically instead of us manually curating the example set that we're giving to the language model, we are letting DSPy perform an optimization process to look at, given this metric, what are the best examples that we can generate to give to the model that give us the best performance on the metric. And what's beautiful about this is that we can continue to use this basic metric, but we can evolve it over time as we learn more about the model's behavior. And because we end up giving it more data, in essence, during the optimization process, what that means is that if we wanted to move from GPT-3 to, say, Claude or Llama 3 or whatnot, Doing so is very straightforward because we have a method for generating examples, and we have a method for testing those examples against some ground truth. That is the power, in my perspective, of DSPy. It gives us the ability to abstract out the models and run an optimization process regardless of the model, big or small. And we can use larger models to help ensure that we're getting better, smaller models. And I think that's a lot of the excitement around DSPy. I think that this is a very powerful library, and I hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial and walkthrough. If you want to learn more, I'm going to be talking about this a bunch. I'll be recording tutorials, sharing what I'm learning, sharing what I've learned and what I'm continuing to learn along the way. And so please follow along, check out Learn by Building AI, and look forward to talking with you soon. Cheers.